Welcome back to the channel. Pro Wrestle Machine here to cover another Wrestling Observer newsletter. Let's dive in. March 10, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Wrestlemania 13 lineup. Joe Higuchi retires. More on Ken Shamrock jumping to WWE. More by Observer staff. The complete WrestleMania 13 lineup was announced over the weekend on local Chicago television, and the general response to it has been less than overwhelming. The 8-match pay-per-view card, besides the already announced nationally matches of Sid vs. Undertaker for the WWF title and a submission rules match with Bret Hart vs. Steve Austin, Ken Shamrock was announced over the weekend in Chicago as the guest referee for this match, confirming what we'd speculated on here last week. Also confirmed were an IC title match with Rocky Maivia vs. the Sultan, a tag title match with Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith defending against Vader and Mankind, a Chicago street fight with the Road Warriors and Ahmed Johnson vs. Savio Vega and Farouk and Crush. Originally, before the Warriors signed with Titan a few days back, the street fight was going to be Johnson vs. Farouk in a singles match. Hunter Hearst Helmsley vs. Goldust, Flash Funk vs. Diesel, and a Four Corners tag team match with the Blackjacks, Godwins, Doug Furnace and Phil LaFon and the Headbangers. There has been some talk of adding a AAA match to the show, but that would more likely be as the free-for-all match. Even though arena business remains strong for WWF, as January was their best month at the gate going back at least 5 or 6 years, there seems to be a feeling of a lack of momentum going into the show, coupled with a lackluster lineup for what traditionally is the biggest wrestling event of the year in North America. Don't ever overlook tradition in saving the event when it comes to late interest on pay-per-view, although I'd say it's a safe bet that the buy rate for this WrestleMania will be well below any WrestleMania buy rate in the past. With 3 weeks to go, the live event at the Rosemont Horizon has already sold more than 11,100 tickets and topped $595,000, so a sellout or a near sellout is assured, and it will probably end up being the biggest live gate of the year in North America as well. But those figures are well behind what a WrestleMania traditionally has in 3 weeks before showtime. And remember just how bad on paper the last Tokyo Dome lineup was, but it still sold out based on tradition more than anything else when it also had a lackluster lineup on paper. Shawn Michaels taking himself out of the picture at the most inopportune of times hurt the show based on what they were building, but the reality of everything is that the decisions had been made for whatever reason to go with Undertaker vs. Sid on top as the title match before the Michaels injury/burnout. The plan was for Michaels vs. Bret Hart as the semifinal, and you'd have to figure that was to be Michaels' turn to repay the favor from last year's Mania results. I'm really not clear where Austin was going to fit into the mix, although you'd have to believe he was going to be put in a key spot originally as well. One of the most enduring behind-the-scene figures in the history of pro wrestling nearly quietly ended his career over the weekend. In a surprise to almost everyone, just prior to the Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Steve Williams Triple Crown Championship main event on the March 1st show at Tokyo's Budokan Hall, it was announced that it would be the final match of the career of referee Joe Higuchi. With the possible exception of Johnny Red Shoes Dugan, a Los Angeles-based referee who worked all over the world, including Japan, Higuchi would probably be the most famous pro wrestling traditional referee ever. Although other referees achieved more short-term fame doing either gimmicks or being heel refs, such as Danny Davis for a stint in the WWF or Tirantes in Mexico, Higuchi often received some of the biggest pops of the entire show when he'd ref a prelim match in recent years at the All Japan Big Shows at Budokan. Now 68, Higuchi, real name Kanji Higuchi, along with the late Dory Funk Sr. were the prime movers in helping Shohei Baba start the All Japan Pro Wrestling Company in 1972 after All left the JWA promotion as it fell into financial difficulties. In addition, he served a function very similar to what we'd call in the US as a road agent since the beginning of the promotion, as he'd travel with the foreign wrestlers and help them in translations, understanding the culture and getting everyone to the bus on time to make the shows. Higuchi, before getting involved with pro wrestling, worked with American servicemen in Japan and spoke fluent English, and in the early days of All Japan was important as a referee in the ring because he understood both English and Japanese, and helped carry Baba's finishes to the foreign wrestlers in the dressing room. Higuchi also occasionally refereed in St. Louis for NWA title matches, including for a famous Jack Briscoe vs. Dory Funk Jr. match at Kiel Auditorium in the early 70s. One of the few remaining players who can date back to the days of Rikidozan in the infancy of Japanese pro wrestling, Higuchi, a former bodybuilder, started as a pro wrestler for Rikidozan's JWA promotion in the 50s. After a short career in the ring, he wound up working behind the scenes taking care of the foreign wrestlers while on tour, and became a referee, which he became most famous for, with the old JWA in 1969. The simple announcement before the main event saw many fans cry, recognizing as the end of a lengthy tradition of the grandfather-like bald-headed referee who was a fixture on the Baba shows and on network television in an anonymous role going back more than a generation. During the last 5 minutes or so of the main event, where Misawa ended up pinning Williams in 27:52 after 3 Tiger Suplex 91s, basically a half Nelson taken over into a German suplex, Baba, who was at ringside doing the color commentary, had tears streaming down his face, which again caused many in the audience to break down as well. It is not known whether or not Higuchi will remain in his longtime road agent-like role with All Japan. Probably the number one topic of conversation this past week, perhaps more within the UFC world than the pro wrestling world, was Ken Shamrock's decision to go to pro wrestling and the WWF in particular. Realistically, the pro wrestling decision was made weeks ago with the Shinya Hashimoto match the first step of a new career and not simply a one-shot deal. While some may try and portray this as Shamrock being afraid of Mark Coleman, or Shamrock leaving real fighting because he's injury-prone, and there may be a measure of truth to the latter, the switch to pro wrestling is more a matter of economic reality. Shamrock went into the Ultimate with the idea that he'd likely face Mark Coleman in the final, so the idea he got out because of fear of Coleman is unfounded. By all accounts, Shamrock was very confident in his chances to the point he was willing to risk an already made reputation going into a tough tournament. And remember, in the original Ultimate plans, his first-round opponent was to be Vitor Belfort. So forget the idea that his leaving was trying to duck Tank Abbott's acceptance of his challenge or anything people wanting to bury him on the way out may come up with. The future of so-called real fights is now in question, both from the political angle and the economic angle. EFC is hanging by a thread. UFC is licking its wounds and has been stagnant as far as pay-per-view buys since taking the big drop starting in July and is the only real name brand in the game. The other organizations have no concept for economic viability and are going to bail out as quickly as they arrive. And Japan and Brazil are no less uncertain. Even if economic and political conditions were different, Shamrock wasn't getting any younger and his long-term prognosis would still be the world of pro wrestling. If not right now, maybe another year or two down the road. Shamrock was quoted in the Dayton Daily News as saying, "What closed the door to me with no holds barred fighting was that I couldn't make enough money to support my family. If I do something I like and can support my family, I will continue to do it. The minute I can't, I've got to do something else." Why WWF? Where his success is far less certain than New Japan, where it would be almost a given. Simply, the WWF put more money on the table. They made the investment, and after losing out on major talent in the past, it's up to the WWF to make that investment pay off. Whether they have the foresight to pull it off is a question. Whether they have the patience to pull it off is a question. And whether it can be pulled off in the United States is also not totally certain, because it requires educating fans to something new, which is never a lock that it'll work, although a good promotion with patience more often than not can pull that process off. The WWF is not expecting to build the company around Shamrock by any means. Despite winning an incredible bidding war for Bret Hart, it's clear the company isn't going to be built around him either. Despite being arguably the best all-around performer in the States and a proven drawing card, the company had decided not to build around Shawn Michaels either. Although WWF is very different from New Japan, they are taking the current New Japan plan where there is a group at the top, that any of the top guys on a given night can beat any of the other top guys. The top level at this point is Undertaker, Sid, Steve Austin, and Bret Hart. Shamrock will no doubt be put in a position to join the quartet, as will probably one or two others like perhaps Davey Boy Smith when he makes his complete turn, and Shawn Michaels will undoubtedly be back at that level if and when he returns. And everyone recognizes Shamrock can't get there if he's portrayed as just another babyface wrestler. George Scott years ago saw him as the next Ricky Steamboat in the Carolinas, right down to working the same angles to get him over with Paul Jones than he had done with Steamboat an era earlier. But before he came anywhere close to that level, Scott's promotion went under and he became a star in Japan doing worked shoot fights, and later doing real shoot fights. But for him to fulfill the stardom Scott saw in him, the last thing he needs to be is another Steamboat. It's no secret what needs to be done, basically educating the audience to submissions with Shamrock portrayed as the master of that game. Will it work? Perhaps not immediately. So the question becomes patience, something pro wrestling promotions have lacked greatly in these days of a new head-to-head ratings battle every Monday night. For the short run, Shamrock is not going to be a guy who makes a difference in the ratings, and a new style isn't going to be understood or over with a new audience for him by next Monday night. I don't know if any one person can be a one-man ratings changer, but certainly if there was, it isn't him. But with the right build-up and booking, and the right opponent, He should be someone who can draw money and interest on pay-per-view for the right match with the right build. If this becomes the beginning of a new road with more emphasis on mat work, realism, and submission finishes, thus enabling wrestlers to get away with less acrobatic and risky high spots and save their bodies in a business where the injury rate and risks seem to get higher by the week, it's better for everyone. But a change like that can't happen overnight. This happened in Japan, as much by necessity because the top guys were breaking down from the punishment, as by someone with a long-term focus deciding to change it. And pro wrestling is all psychology. All Japan got a simple move like Mitsuharu Misawa's facelock over as a killer finisher a few years back. How? Because Jumbo Tsuruta submitted to the move and presto, that's all it needed. If the WWF has Shamrock make the top stars tap to whatever maneuver or maneuvers he's pushed as having as his finishers, they'll be recognized by people as deadly finishers. If they're treated the way that WCW announcers treat those same submissions when Dean Malenko has them on, as an excuse to babble about Roddy Piper, then the resulting fan reaction to them will be the same as in WCW. In the US, with more bodies to choose from and stars that can get away with coasting on the road, or avoiding the road altogether, it isn't the necessity to get simple maneuvers like facelocks, sleepers, knee bars and arm bars over and change what the classic match builds to as it was when similar changes were made in Japan to protect the bodies of the guys on top that need to headline for years to come. And another point needs to be made in a business so ratings driven. When these changes were made within the Japanese business, while arena business largely stayed strong and in some cases got even stronger as the matches increased their believability factor, the fact was, initially, ratings dropped. They eventually rebounded, but there was a period where they got dangerously low across the board. The casual audience wasn't as entertained at the same time the more serious audience was able to suspend disbelief, take the product more seriously and thus increasing the drama quotient, and the end result was more tickets sold for the major matches. As we've noted many times and as history shows clearly both short and long term, drawing money at the gate and drawing television ratings are two entirely different animals which require two entirely different approaches to the game. It's also funny the reaction I've received to the Shamrock signing. Several veteran legends of the not-too-distant past, some of whom are still around today, thought he'd be the perfect person to put the world title on because of his credibility, and put on quickly. A few current wrestlers who follow UFC also believed his potential for stardom was great and that the WWF made a tremendous move for the organization, but there are dissenting views as well. If the WWF thinks that because Shamrock is on its television or on its pay-per-view shows that UFC fans that saw him as a major superstar will suddenly buy the WWF product, I don't see it happening. And while there is a crossover between the two audiences, it's not significant enough to instantly make someone a superstar any more than bringing in a pro football star and not doing a good job of hyping him makes him a drawing card. Kevin Green and Steve McMichael, and to a greater extent Lawrence Taylor, were all legitimate pro football stars, and pro football is one hell of a lot bigger entity than either UFC or pro wrestling. And the initial angle for all these men was given tons of pub and put over as if it was the biggest event of the year within those respective companies. WWF would hit a home run if Shamrock's angle was done anywhere near as well as the angles leading to the debut of Taylor, Green, and McMichael were done. Yet both angles bombed on pay-per-view when it came to buy rate, even though the matches in both cases were much better than anyone could have hoped for going in. Simply put, fans of those athletes from real sports have no interest in seeing them in something they consider a joke. The Shamrock UFC fans have no interest in seeing Shamrock participate in something they consider a joke. The few super hardcore Shamrock fans who will order pro wrestling if he's on it don't number enough to make any difference in a TV rating or a buy rate, just as the name Kevin Green, coming off a Pro Bowl year with media publicity, won't make a difference in a national buy rate unless his angle is strong enough on its own to make that difference. However, if any of the above-mentioned names made the transition to being wrestling stars, were given the right training and push, they could very quickly become major stars. McMichael, with very little training and ability in the ring, certainly nowhere close to what Shamrock has, is a legitimate star with less than 1 year and only a handful of matches, largely due to charisma and a lot of help in positioning by being put in a high-ranked group. And at this point, while in the ring, his NFL legitimacy was a major help in him getting there. In the case of Shamrock, with the right angle and push, he'll have an easier time getting over because of his legitimacy to the new audience. But nobody from the outside has a strong enough name to get over with the lack of that right angle and push in American wrestling. New Japan is in a major bind. Everyone knows the story and they made a major mistake. In this day and age, you can't announce a match publicly until the match is signed. By jumping the gun, New Japan left its business even flatter than the WWF's is at this point. The idea of pro wrestling is to build the audience into wanting to see a specific thing, and then when interest is at a peak, giving it to them. New Japan had a winner of an idea and knew it, and told the public about it before it was etched in stone. Now they have an empty public, all waiting and wanting to see something they can't deliver. Unless they pull a major rabbit out of their hats, whatever they can deliver is going to look second-rate in comparison. Very similar to WWF spending nearly 1 year building up the idea of Bret Hart getting another crack at Shawn Michaels' title, and then pissing it away by looking for short-term answers, abandoning it as a feature, and then losing out on it completely. UFC, the company because of its non-work nature that has far less control over its bookings, allowed Shamrock to do strong hype for a match that may have drawn the most interest of any match it could present as far as to the general public. And now it can't deliver the match either. As worked pro wrestling, both in the US and Japan, look for outsiders to either do the New Japan special angle or pop in as a surprise American mystery partner angle. UFC stars, whether they have pro wrestling experience or not, are going to be looked at. And don't think nearly every one of them would be interested. Pro wrestling offers more money, more security, more stability, and less danger. Martial arts fans may want their sport to be this pure things where people compete for honor and wanting to prove their skills, but that thought process doesn't last long once you're in the world of professional entertainment and you're the economic commodity. And the problem with UFC is, once someone reaches the top level, there are only two places to go: down or somewhere else. If billed going in as the Nitro, you would never forget. And after the March 3rd show from Atlanta's Omni, WCW would just as soon hope to God that slogan isn't the case. In front of the first legitimate turnaway crowd at the Omni for pro wrestling in so long that nobody can even remember the last time, even for the live Starrcades in 1985 and 1986 when Starrcade was considered the NWA card of the year, the Omni didn't actually sell out, so I think you'd have to go back to the 70s. It was the night when Roddy Piper proved himself to not be bulletproof and WCW unleashed an ill-fated angle that failed by Loch Ness proportions, a failure that virtually everyone in the organization immediately recognized as it was going on. Ironically, while this was going on, WCW was enjoying its greatest advantage in the history of the Monday Night Wars with an incredible 3-point lead, tripling the audience for Raw at the same time. Because of seats blocked off for the television setup, the actual sellout was 13,693 with 10,353 paying $137,211. Because of the Turner organization being based in Atlanta and employees, friends and relatives of employees and other groups all traditionally getting comps, WCW was basically required to comp tons of tickets to the event even though it was clear from the first day tickets went on sale that they didn't need to comp it all to pack the building. There have been shows during the heyday of Jim Crockett's organization in the mid-80s, including the aforementioned Starrcades, that put more people in the building, but that was with a 17,000-seat setup. WCW once put 15,000 in the building, although that show had kids free so the paid was closer to 10,000 for a Ric Flair vs. Terry Funk match in 1989. Overall ratings for March 3rd saw Nitro win handily with its biggest edge since the head-to-head 2-hour deal started, with a 3.41 rating and 5.19 share to Raw's 1.91 rating and 2.99 share. The Nitro replay did a 1.5 rating and 3.7 share. While there have been a few shows with larger ratings gaps overall, there was never a period like the quarter between 9:15 and 9:30 p.m., when WCW had the Piper debacle going head-up against a WWF title match with Sid vs. Mankind. WCW held a 4.5 to 1.5 edge, a margin unprecedented in the history of the Monday Night Wars. WCW easily won every quarter hour, opening with a 3.1 to 1.7 lead when it had Steve McMichael and Jeff Jarrett vs. Conan and Hugh Morris going up against Bret Hart vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, showing that whatever curiosity all the introductions of new players the previous week raised didn't last long. WWF closed the gap with the finish of Hart Helmsley going up against Juventud Guerrera vs. Ray Mendoza Jr. to 2.8 to 2.1, the closest it would ever get. WCW spread the lead out to 3.2 to 2.0 for the Bischoff/Schiller angle plus Eddie Guerrero vs. Ultimo Dragon, while Raw had Sultan vs. Flash Funk. Shockingly, for a Mr. Wall Street vs. Scotty Riggs match, WCW picked up to a 3.5 while Raw, doing replay segments with the Road Warriors and an Ahmed Johnson interview, did a 2.0. After that came the Piper segment, which was one of those amazing things about television ratings, a segment so bad it stunned the audience into turning off the other station and paying attention. Things went back to normal with Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. JL at 3.5 in the NWO interview and Angle in the Luger and Giant vs. Steiners going to a 3.7, while WWF presented the Hart-Smith Classic, which drew an unclassic like 1.9s in both quarters. The WCW margin of victory was so great that it closed the gap in the La Femme Nikita vs. Robin Hood War to a USA Network win by a 1.5 to 1.4 margin. In a 20-minute-long angle, which was Piper's idea to introduce his four-man team for the uncensored three-team cage match main event, Piper brought out 6 men and said he'd ask the fans to vote thumbs up or thumbs down on them and that they could pick his team. To say the idea was a catastrophe would be putting it mildly. The shock was that the fans picked up on how bad it was with Piper, the man who could give interviews that were total nonsense, and his personal charisma was such that fans would think they were classics, the man who could go out and do almost nothing in the ring, and his presence was such fans thought they were seeing a classic match, and the man who could do the world's most embarrassing pretty boy music video on a wrestling show and still get over as a tough guy with absolutely no negative effects on his popularity as the main focal point. The original plan for the uncensored main event was a 3-team deal with the NWO team, the WCW team, and finally introducing Sting's team. However, with Piper getting such a huge reaction and the success of the show at the Cow Palace, with Piper's name clearly being the key one in making the difference and popping the huge event, WCW decided to prolong the Sting angle once again and use a Piper team as a replacement. Piper's idea that they decided to accept, since he has full creative control of his own angles under contract, was to do the show that he originally wasn't scheduled to be part of, provided he could pick his team as a shoot to give some of his friends work in wrestling. So he outdid Hogan in that regard. Piper wanted to pick John Tenta, who was his friend who he wanted to help get back into WCW as a shoot since WCW had stopped using him, and also get work for his bodyguard/gopher and a friend of his from his straight-to-video action movies. The idea was a disaster from the start. The segment started with Piper saying that he would fight 6 guys, one at a time, and he wanted the fans to pick which 4 he kept, although in typical Piper fashion, he didn't quite make that clear either. The first guy brought out was a huge bodybuilder from the power plant in Atlanta, who Piper wasted in a matter of seconds, and the fans voted thumbs down. The second guy was an even bigger bodybuilder from the power plant. It's good to see what the future of WCW wrestling looks like, who in his 40 seconds of fame showed real potential before getting wasted. Another thumbs down as planned. This is where the problems started. After 2 huge bodybuilders, they followed it up with a cross between Gabe Kaplan, how's that for a dated reference, and a leprechaun wearing boxing gloves. This was the man joked behind the scenes in WCW as being Piper's broody, in reference to Ed Leslie as Terry Bollia's permanent sidekick, gopher and what have you, his real-life traveling partner and bodyguard. After some of the worst fake boxing sequences you'll ever see, with Piper trying to make his buddy look good, the fans booed it roundly, but they were supposed to cheer. So Piper said he thought the fans were being too hard on him, and they went at it again. By this time, the guy was totally blown up, so he had to take off his gloves because he couldn't even lift his arms. The fans booed it worse, even though he was supposed to be cheered. Then Piper brought out a tall guy doing a martial arts gimmick, who was an actor friend of his in real life. By this time, Piper was totally blown up, and the guy's acting skills in doing a live kickboxing fight scene made Glacier look like Peter Aerts. By the time Tenta came out, billed by announcer Mike Tenay as a former sumo wrestler, which is a shoot, the segment was gone, but it wound up with all 3 members of Piper's team fighting each other with about as much intensity as little girls pillow fighting. Backstage while this was going on, the thought process was largely that they were in danger of not only ruining their upcoming pay-per-view, making it a trifecta for the uncensored gimmick, but of destroying Piper's future drawing power. There was talk of changing the planned finish of the show, where all 3 teams would be in the ring brawling with each other as the show went off the air, to having Piper's team destroyed and end the gimmick right there. But for whatever reason, probably because nobody could figure out how to exactly break the news to Piper, the originally planned show ending took place. The plan, and this can certainly change on 7 days' notice since it requires Piper's okaying it, is to attempt to get Piper to agree to dump the teammates from the show, and have Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson go to him and give him Chris Benoit, whose injury angle will be shortened, Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael, which would pull the latter 2 away from their scheduled match with Public Enemy. As to whether any of this or all of this happens, stay tuned Monday. As of press time, Piper's team is still slated to be Tenta, the boxer who will be named Craig, his real first name, and the kickboxer named Leighton, real name Leighton Morse, who will be billed as some sort of a tough man contest champion. The NWO team will be Hogan and Hall and Nash and Savage, while the WCW team will be Luger and Giant and Steiners. The Omni show was also to be the night where Ted Turner fired Eric Bischoff from his post at WCW in Angle. As it turned out, Turner decided, having nothing to do with the story getting out in the New York Daily News, that he didn't want to do a wrestling angle after all, and sent Dr. Harvey Schiller, who runs TBS Sports, in his place. Schiller did a better job than you'd expect given an outsider doing an angle. The problem was at the end of the show, Bischoff and Hogan were no longer even selling the angle from the first hour, and were apparently trying to set up a subsequent angle themselves involving Turner for a later date. On the other side of the world, the Monday Night Raw taped on February 26 in Berlin, Germany, featured the single best match on either a Raw or Nitro since the beginning of the Wrestling War, a 23 minutes long 4.5 stars classic where the British Bulldog captured the new European title in a tournament final beating tag team partner Owen Hart. The two tag partners went back to their roots doing a 1980s Japanese-style match with near fall after near fall and both men pulling out every trick in their arsenal, with Bulldog even allowing Hart to kick out of his powerslam finisher before sitting back with a reverse pin after Hart scored a near fall with a Rana. If this match was held on a pay-per-view show, it would finish high in balloting for Match of the Year, but the Raw show overall lacked something when it came to energy and atmosphere, and I don't think the show quite did justice to the quality of the main event. The European title, which is going to be followed up on and become the fourth championship belt in the WWF, culminated a week-long tournament in Germany. First-round matches saw Bulldog over Mankind, February 20th in Aschaffenburg, Vader pin Rocky Maivia, February 21st in Chemnitz, Owen Hart over Flash Funk, February 22nd in Dresden, and Bret Hart pinning Hunter Hearst Helmsley, February 23rd in Cologne. The semifinals saw Bulldog pin Vader February 24th in Oberhausen, and Owen Hart pin Bret February 25th in Hamburg. Plans are for the European title to be treated in a storyline perspective as similar to the Intercontinental title, in that it will be defended stateside and become a regular feature on pay-per-view shows. It was billed as the creation of the first new title in the WWF in 20 years, which is only a slight exaggeration as the IC title was created in September 1979 for Pat Patterson. Raw was easily the better show this week with superior match quality, but in many ways was a flat show as well as WWF still came off as a promotion badly lacking momentum going into its biggest show of the year. The ECW angle was continued with separate phone calls with Jerry Lawler and Paul Heyman, and to the surprise of many, including Heyman himself, ECW will be on the live Raw as originally scheduled on March 10th in Worcester, Massachusetts. This will no doubt lead to even more speculation as to why this is happening so close to a WrestleMania that needs all the help it can and that won't at this point have any ECW involvement. While the ECW segments drew slightly better overall than the WWF segments on the February 24th Raw when it came to ratings, actually it was only the Stevie Richards BWO segment that did any better. The overall consensus was it was among the worst Raw shows ever from a technical standpoint, and something of a disaster from the WWF end. There was a lot of talk after the show that while any exposure was A+ for ECW, the mix was not beneficial to WWF and the plans for March 10th would be pulled. Bret Hart, who has long hated ECW, ripped on them in his column in the Calgary Sun, and it's no secret that Jerry Lawler's line on Raw about a lot of the WWF wrestlers being mad at the association was a shoot, although at the February 24th Raw there was no sign of problems by anyone, and even Jim Cornette and Heyman grudgingly shook hands. Even Heyman himself wasn't sure of whether or not his crew would be invited back until the afternoon of March 3rd when he was asked to phone in on Raw to hype being there for next week. WWF did hype the ECW wrestlers on most of its weekend programming and put together an excellent video package for Raw, completed with digitized footage of the violence, that Heyman himself couldn't have done a better job of to get his company over as something different. There are total denials from Heyman in regard to WWF having any financial stake in ECW or its upcoming pay-per-view show. There are many within the industry who don't believe that, although nobody who believes it has any tangible evidence of it. The best argument is simply noting the ECW pay-per-view show got more hype and airtime to be promoted on WWF programming than the Leonard Camacho fight did, and the WWF definitely had a financial stake in that show, and that WWF of late has had an ironclad policy of not letting anyone appear on television that wasn't locked into a contract, and yet now all of a sudden there are guys all over its television, any of whom its rival promotion could theoretically take on a moment's notice. It does create curiosity and talk, and WWF does need that. And without question a promotion versus promotion feud would boost business for both sides in the short run. But does WWF need it at the expense of its own product rather than adding to its own product? Since by all accounts the traditional wrestling approach of a promotion versus promotion deal isn't part of the plans, particularly with WrestleMania around the corner. And the other question is, why, if you've got the single greatest angle possible in recent times that always works wonders when done correctly, or even done incorrectly as New Japan versus UWFI and WCW versus NWO have been at times, you instead have the outsider group play babyface and feud only with the company heel court jester rather than a serious star, and set up no plans for interpromotional matches? There's no doubt an ECW versus WWF feud would work to the short-term benefit of both groups. But in the long term, it would be more difficult because Paul Heyman's company doesn't appear to be in the financial straits that other companies who laid down and played dead for New Japan and turned into pro wrestling supernovas have been. WWF exposure is good, but they don't need WWF, at least not today, for survival. If they do poorly on pay-per-view, that may change, but as it stands today, ECW is a cult merchandising bonanza and its house show business isn't spectacular, but it fills up small halls most weekends. Ken Shamrock was also announced as appearing on the show, although there was no context or explanation as to a storyline reason as to why. Hart's half-worked column about ECW, saying it was the first time he and Lawler ever agreed on anything, stated, among other things, to call ECW second-rate isn't accurate because to me, it doesn't even rate. It is interesting ECW wants to be on Raw. ECW cult guru, Paul E. Dangerously, Paul Heyman, has brainwashed his followers into believing ECW is a rebel group that won't dilute the extreme nature of its style to conform to TV censors or arena administrators. While this philosophy has cultivated ECW's loyal following in their home area, it has kept them from expanding into other venues and limited them to poor TV time slots in only a few markets. It is not surprising Heyman is now trying to convince the cable companies his product is similar to WWF and WCW. What better way to show them that ECW has the WWF stamp of approval than to be on Raw? The style of ECW matches on Raw was changed to make them acceptable to censors and fans. You'd think ECW followers would be outraged the ECW matches on Raw weren't hardcore. You'd think they'd turn on Paul E for selling out everything he has been preaching to them. Instead, they all waved at the cameras. Results. February 15th, Caguas, Puerto Rico, WWC, Farmer Sam BX Convicto 308, Chiqui Star and Invader No. 1 Huracan Castillo and Jim Steele, WWC Tag Titles, Ricky Santana and La Ley Texas Hangman DQ, Ray Gonzalez B. Steele, Skull Von Crush B. El Profe, Universal Title El Nene B. Carlos Colon to win title. February 18th, Birmingham, Alabama, WWF, 2519, Headbanger Mosh B. Freddie Joe Floyd, Headbanger Thrasher B. Barry Horowitz, Godwins B. Blackjacks DQ, Brackus B. Mr. X, Tom Pritchard, Diesel B. TL Hopper, Arm Wrestling, Sonny B. Marlena, Goldust B. Savio Vega, Cage Match Undertaker B. Farouk. February 21st, Madero, AAA, 9000, Latin Lover 1 4-man elimination over Mascara Sagrada Jr., Jerry Estrada, and The Killer, Heavy Metal 1 4-man elimination over Blue Demon Jr., Maniaco and My Flowers via DQ, Hector Garza 1 4-man elimination over Pero Aguayo Jr., Abismo Negro and La Parca Jr., Octagon 1 4-man elimination over Pantera, Fuerza Guerrera, and Pentagon, Mini Vader and Mini Mankind and Mini Goldust B. La Parquita and Super Muñequito and Mini Nova, Lover 1 Final 4 over Garza, Heavy, and Octagon. February 21st, Durham, New Hampshire, WWF, 4177, Headbanger Mosh B. Barry Horowitz, Brackus B. Tony DeVito, Headbanger Thrasher B. Freddie Joe Floyd, Miguel Perez B. Jose Estrada Jr. Arm Wrestling, Marlena B. Sonny DQ, Goldust B. Crush, Bart Gunn B. TL Hopper, Godwins B. Blackjacks DQ, Cage Match Undertaker B. Farouk. February 21st, Mexico City, Promo Azteca, Tiburon and Antifaz and Kato Kung Lee B. Jurassico and Scandalo and Rocky Santana, Super Electra and Angel Azteca and Vaquero Romo B. Shu El Guerrero and Black Dragon and Pantera del Ring DQ, Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000 and Pirata Morgan B. Tarzan Boy and Zorro and Vampiro Canadiense DQ. February 21st, Smithtown, New York, Eastern Shores Wrestling, Shark Attack Kid B. Black Panther, 911 and Primo Carnera 3B Ralph LaRue and Devon Storm and Armageddon, Doink the Clown, Gino Caruso, B. Mr. Puerto Rico, Ralph Soto, Steve Corino B. Gary Reno, Tony DeVito B. Prince of Pleasure, Hard Rock Hamilton Car Armageddon, Carnera 3B King Kong Bundy. February 22nd, Yardville, New Jersey, NWA, 350, Lost Boys B. New Bad Attitude, Bobby V. B. Billy Real, Reckless Youth B. Jason Knight, Inferno Kid B. Mr. Puerto Rico, Julio Sanchez and Don Montoya B. Downward Spiral, Donnie B. B. Rick Ratchet, Overweight Lover B. Magic, NWA Title Dan Severn D. Dory Funk. February 22nd, St. Matthews, East Coast Wrestling Alliance, Tournament for TV title Billy Kidman B. Reckless Youth, Ace Darling B. Inferno Kid, Lance Diamond B. Ravishing Ronnie, Cheetah Master B. Devon Storm, Cheetah B. Kidman, Darling B. Diamond, Darling B. Cheetah to win tourney, Mr. Ulala and Animal and Commando B Warhawk and Primo Carnera 3 and Hawk B Glenn Osborne, Boogie Woogie Brown B King Kong Bundy. February 22nd, Woodlawn, Virginia, Ultimate Championship Wrestling, John Masters 1 Battle Royal, California Kid B Riot DQ, Cannonball Jones B Assassin, Sweet Stone B Lady Killer, Jerry Lee and Ray Jackson B Latin Lover, Not Original, and Mr. Big Stuff, Masters B Demolition Axe, Bill Eadie DQ, Ricky Morton B Vladimir Koloff. February 22nd, Mobile, Alabama, Robert Gibson Promotions, Al Savage B Joe Kane, Mr. Hollywood B Bobby Doll, Savage and Marcel Pringleker Don DiBiase and Kane, Ken Lucas B Bob Armstrong, Scott and Steve Armstrong DDQ Samu and Robert Gibson. February 23rd, Cologne, Germany, WWF, 3323 Aldo Montoya B Bob Holly, Doug Furness and Phil LaFon B Leif Cassidy and Salvatore Sincere, Sultan B Flash Funk, IC title, Rocky Maivia B Owen Hart DQ, Bret Hart B Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Davey Boy Smith B Billy Gunn, Ahmed Johnson B Vader, WWF title Sid B Mankind. February 23rd, Glens Falls, New York, WWF, 2537, Brackus B Tony DeVito, Blackjacks B Godwins, Arm Wrestling, Marlena B Sunny DQ, Goldust B Crush, Headbanger Mosh B Barry Horowitz, Headbanger Thrasher B Freddie Joe Floyd, Bart Gunn B TL Hopper, Cage Match Undertaker B Farouk. February 24th, Anomichi All Japan Women, Nani Takahashi B Miho Waikazawa, Momoe Nakanishi B Yuka Shina, Genki Misae B Yumi Fukawa, Tomoko Watanabe and Kaoru Ito B Yoshiko Tamura and Yumiko Hata, Mariko Yoshida B Saya Endo, Asia Kong and Takako Inoue B Manami Toyota and Kumiko Makawa. February 25th, Sono All Japan 2950 Sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi B Kentaro Shiga, Yoshinari Ogawa and Masao Inoue B Rex King and Sean Morley, Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi B Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace B Jun Izumida and Giant Kimala 2, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taubi Stan Hansen and Takawa Mori, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako B Tamon Honda and Kena Kobashi and Manukia Mossman. February 25th, Mexico City Arena Coliseo, EMLL, Cadaver de Ultra Tumba and Espectro Jr. and Damian El Guerrero B Alacron and Olympus and Ultraman Jr., Astro Ray Jr. and Olympico and Ringo Mendoza B El Hijo del Gladiador and Mano Negra and Mocho Cota DQ, Elimination Match Negro Casas and Ultimo Dragon and Mascara Magica, and Dos Caras B Emilio Charles Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and Ray Bucanero and Felino, Headhunters and Black Warrior B Atlantis and Black Magic and Brasso de Plata. February 26th, Berlin, Germany, WWF Monday Night Raw tapings, 6373, Salvatore Sincere B Alex Porto, Doug Furness and Phil LaFon B Aldo Montoya and Bob Holly, Ahmed Johnson B Leif Cassidy, Hunter Hearst Helmsley B Bret Hart DQ 2 stars, IC title, Rocky Maivia B Vader DQ 2.5 stars, Sultan B Flash Funk 1 star, WWF title, Sid B Mankind 2.5 stars, European title tourney finals Davey Boy Smith B Owen Hart 4.5 stars. February 26th, Kiryu All Japan Women, Yukashina B Rumi Sekiguchi, Yumi Fukawa B Miho Waikazawa, Momoe Nakanishi B Nani Takahashi, Asia Kong and Kyoko Inoue B Takako Inoue and Yumiko Hata, Kaoru Ito B Genki Misae, Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa and Saya Endo B Manami Toyota and Mariko Yoshida and Yoshiko Tamura. February 26th, Nashville, Tennessee, North American All-Star Wrestling, Shane Morton B Billy Briggs, Steve Neely B Chris Michaels, Debbie Combs B Mighty Heidi, Doug Gilbert B Convict, Tommy Rich B Tracy Smothers DQ, Gilbert B Ben Jordan, Colorado Kid B Justin St. John. February 27th, Oda All Japan, 1600, Mighty Inoue B Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Yoshinari Ogawa B Kentaro Shiga, Giant Kimala 2 B Rex King, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota B Jun Izumida and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace B Manukia Mossman and Sean Morley, Stan Hansen and Takao Omori B Mitsuharu Misawa and Masao Inoue, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao and Tamon Honda B Kena Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako. February 28th, Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, ECW 400, Little Guido B Chris Chetty, Taz B Balls Mahoney, Rob Van Dam B Spike Dudley, ECW Tag Titles, Eliminators B Pitbulls, Tommy Dreamer B D Von Dudley, Sandman B Bubba Ray Dudley, ECW Title Raven B Louis Piccoli, Sabu B Chris Condito. February 28, Akwesasne, New York, IFC, 2,200 sellout. Leonard Terrence v. John Tatro, Scott Taylor v. Simon Buck, John Bechtold v. David Hood, Chris Oster v. Ken Cronenberg, Wesley Gassaway v. Zane Frazier, Frank Laughing v. Harry Moskowitz, Robert Lalonde v. Gene Hall, Mike Isaac v. Elan Couture, Lalonde v. Bechtold, Gassaway v. Isaac, George Carson v. J. Russell, Becky Levy v. Betty Fagan, Gassaway v. Lalonde to win tournament. February 28, Mexico City Arena, Mexico, EMLL 10,000, Lady Apache and Flor Metallica v. La Diabolica and Pantera Serena, Jaguar and Solar 2 v. Chicago Express and Reyes Veloz, Solar and Super Astro and Shocker v. Violencia and Karloff Lagarde Jr. and Archangel, CMLL Tag Tourney Semifinals, Dos Cars and Ultimo Dragon v. Headhunters, Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr. v. Negro Casas and Black Magic, Atlantis and La Fiera and Dandy v. El Satanico and Apollo Dantes and Bestia Salvaje, CMLL Tag Title Tourney Finals King and Wagner Jr. v. Cars and Dragon. February 28, Mexico City Juan de la Barrera Gym, AAA, 4,500, Los Chivas Rayadas Ian 2 and El Mexicano v. Frank Nitti and Goyo and Al Capone DQ, Mascarada Sagrada Jr. and Mini Supernova and Mini Cybernetico v. Mini Mankind and Mini Goldust and Mini Vader, Venom and Luxor and Discovery and Supernova v. Picudo and Hysteria and Mach 1 and Mosco de la Merced, Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Pantera v. La Parca Jr. and Blue Demon Jr., Latin Lover and Hector Garza and Octagon v. Pentagon and Fuerza Guerrera and Abismo Negro DQ, Pero Aguayo and Connect and Cybernetico v. Pierroth Jr. and Diesel and Razor Ramon Core. February 28, Kamisato, All Japan Women, Rumi Skijuchi v. Miyuki Fuji, Nani Takahashi v. Miho Waikazawa, Momoe Nakanishi v. Yukashina, Asia Kong and Kumiko Makawa and Yumi Fukawa v. Tashio Yamada and Genki Misae and Yoshiko Tamura, Mima Shimoda v. Saya Endo, Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe v. Kaoru Ito and Ri Tamada. February 28, Tokyo, Battlerts, 260 sellout, Takeshi Ono v. Hiyaka, Shuichi Funaki v. Naohiro Hoshikawa, Yuki Ishikawa v. Alexander Otsuka, Gran Hamada v. Minoru Tanaka, Katsumi Ujuda and Daisuke Ikeda v. Carl Greco and Victor Kruger. February 28, Hiroshima, JWP, Rieko Amano and Mayumi Ozaki v. Tomoko Kuzumi and Kanako Matoya, Borishoi Kid and Cutie Suzuki v. Hiromi Yagi and Hikari Fukuoka, Yagi and Candy Akutsu and Fukuoka and Devil Masami v. Tomoko Miyaguchi and Amano and Suzuki and Dynamite Kansai. February 28, Fremont, California, Big Time Wrestling, 600, J Styles d. Shane Cody, Shane Farmer, Con the Rocker v. Super Diablo, Border Patrol, Michael Modest and Mike Diamond, v. Steve Rizzono and Frank Dalton, Dr. Blood v. Johnny Payne DQ, Tito Santana v. Moon Dog Moretti, Greg Valentine v. Buddy Rose DQ, Santana 1 Battle Royal. February 28, Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, World Wrestling Empire, 310, Principal v. Fox, Denny Cooley v. Kevin Kirby, Billy Kidman v. Thunderfoot, David Isley, Ron Studd v. Hardbody Harrison, The Assassin Buddy Porter, v. Jimmy Valiant, Isley and Big Cheese, Sal Corrente, v. Ken Timms and Pez Watley, Tommy Rich v. Masked Superstar, Bill Eadie, DQ. February 28, Watermill, New York, Eastern Shores Wrestling, Panther v. Prince of Pleasure, Rocky Shore and Tony DeVito and Coco Savage v. Gino Caruso and Ralph Mosca and Rican Havoc, Bam Bam Bigelow v. Doink the Clown, Gary Fall, Shark Attack Kid DDQ, Gary Reno, Jimmy Snuka v. Metal Maniac, Brian Liedker Primo Carnera 3, Samoan Gangstas Lloyd and Matthew v. Rodney Allen and Johnny Diamond. March 1, Tokyo Budokan Hall, All Japan, 16,300 sellout, Yoshinari Ogawa and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi v. Masao Inoue and Satoru Asako 1423, Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota v. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen 958, Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida and Tomo Honda v. Masao Fuchi and Takao Mori and Giant Baba 1621, Manukia Mossman and Johnny Ace v. Rex King and Stan Hansen 1139, Kentaro Shiga and Jun Akiyama v. Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Kenta Kobashi 1706, PWF and International Tag Titles, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taube, Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama 1412, Triple Crown Mitsuharu Misawa v. Steve Williams 2752. March 1, Columbia, South Carolina, WCW, 2,612 sellout, Bobby Eaton beat Disco Inferno, Rey Mysterio Jr. d. Steve Regal, U.S. title Eddie Guerrero v. Dean Malenko, Marcus Bagwell v. Nick Patrick, Lex Luger and the Giant v. Faces of Ear, Diamond Dallas Page v. Randy Savage DQ, Jeff Jarrett and Chris Benoit b. Scott Hall and Scott Norton. March 1, Scranton, Pennsylvania, ECW 1590, Has b. Spike Dudley, Sabu b. Corporal Punishment, Tommy Rich b. Chris Chetty, Chris Condito b. Louis Spicoli, Sandman and Tommy Dreamer b. Bubba Ray and D. Von Dudley, Lance Storm b. Axel Rotten, ECW title. Raven b. Pit Bull No. 2, ECW Tag Titles Tables and Ladders Legal Eliminators b. Sabu and Rob Van Dam. March 1, Livingston, New Jersey, Charity Show, 380, Ace Darling b. Devon Storm, Mike Sharpker King Kong Bundy, Jimmy Snuka b. Metal Maniac, Bam Bam Bigelow DDQ Nikolai Volkov, Doink, Mike Kalla, b. Steve Corino, Mighty Maccabee Jeff Bookants, b. Iron Sheik. March 1, Bayou La Batterie, Alabama, Unified Championship Wrestling, 500 Tony Sweat b. Mystic Tiger, Cousin Boudreaux b. Zodiac Warrior, Lord Humongous d. Max Payne, Joe Kane b. Kevin Northcutt, Al Savage b. Scott Armstrong DQ, Marcel Pringle b. Bob Armstrong DQ. March 2, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, Ishikawa Ika, 1500 Takeshi Sato b. Keizo Matsuda, Katsumi Hirano b. Akinori Tsukioka, Minoru Tanaka b. Hidaka, Mariko Yoshida b. Emi Motokawa, Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki b. Kishin Kawabata and Masashi Aoyagi, Geto b. Gecko, Masao Orihara, Takashi Ishikawa and Shigeo Okamura and Shun Matsuzaki b. Matsuda and Daiko Kubo Benkei and Great Kabuki. March 2, Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan Women, 1300, Miho Wakizawa b. Rumi Sekiguchi, Momoe Nakanishi b. Nani Takahashi, Yumi Fukawa and Yuka Shinobi, Tanny Mouse and Miyuki Fuji, Kumiko Maikawa and Ri Tamada and Yoshiko Tamura b. Atsuko Mita and Genki Misae and Yumiko Hata, Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida b. Tashio Yamada and Mima Shimoda, Manami Toyota b. Saya Endo, Asia Kong and Kaoru Ito, Ikyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe. March 2, Kawasaki, J.D., 680 Sellout, Chikako Shiratori b. Emi Motokawa, Aldo Moreno b. Sagabi, Bloody Phoenix and Kuga b. Yuko Kasugi and Jaguar Yokota, La Infernal b. Esther Moreno, Linus Asuka and Masked Ryuna b. Yuki Lee and Bison Kimura. March 2, Baltimore, MD, Mid-Eastern Wrestling Federation, Bodacious Pretty Boy NC Dirty Dog, Samoan Gangster Jason Knight and Jimmy Cicero, Knuckles Zanwich b. Inferno Kid, Pit Bulls b. Bad Crew, Adam Flash 1 triangular ladder match over Quinn Nash and Steve Corino, Tully Blanchard b. Knight, Raven b. Bob Starr, Lucifer b. Joe Thunder, Stevie Richards b. Corporal Punishment. March 2, Clearwater, Florida, Clearwater Pro Wrestling, Mimic the Mime b. Italian Stallion, Tommy Gunn NC Bo Sawyer, Tank Putskin b. Lionheart, Rowdy the Rodeo Clown b. Midnight Rider, Del Apollo b. Cuban Assassin DQ, Lenny Poffo b. Johnny West, Rough Riders b. Cash Incorporated, Molly McShane b. Sweet Wonder, Brett Sawyer b. Greg Valentine DQ. March 3, Atlanta Omni, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings, 13,693 sellout with 10,353 paid, Ernest Miller b. Yuji Nagata, Conan and Hugh Morris b. Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael, Diamond Dallas Page b. Rick Fuller, Juventud Guerrera b. Ray Mendoza Jr., Dean Malenko b. Mike Enos, U.S. title Eddie Guerrero b. Ultimo Dragon, Scotty Riggs b. Mr. Wall Street DQ, Rey Mysterio Jr. b. JL, Lex Luger and Giant NC Steiners. March 3, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Universal Vale Tudo Federation, One Night Tournament Carlos Barreto b. Geza Coleman Jr., Daniel Bobish b. Joe Shamar, Kevin Randleman b. Ebenezer Fontes, Mario Neto b. Gary Goodridge, Barreto b. Bobish, Randleman b. Neto, Barreto b. Randleman to win tournament. Special thanks to Earl Lunsford, Eddie Goldman, Rick Vaughn, Georgianne Macropolis, Chris Bors, Dominic Valenti, Dan Garza, Bobby Baum, Matt Chernus, Travis Edgeworth, Robert Rothas, Michael Omanke, Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Dan Paris, Faye Ferguson, Tony Early, Greg John, Manuel Gonzalez, Jesse Money, Joe Silva. Japanese Television Rundown. February 16th, All Japan. 1. Ogawa pinned Rex King in 1334. These two had a good match at this time last year, but this wasn't much of a sequel. 1 1/4 stars. 2. Williams and Ace and Mossman beat Misawa and Akiyama and Asako in 21:55 when Williams pinned Akiyama after dropping him on his head. The idea was to work hot spots with Misawa and Williams to build up their title match, but it just didn't happen. Williams looked off for most of the match, even to the point of not being able to lift Akiyama on his shoulders the first time when he and Ace did the double impact or sky-high lariat spot. 2 1/4 stars. February 23rd, All Japan. 1. Kimala 2 and Izumida and Tao beat Hansen and Amori and Honda in 1445 when Kimala 2 pinned Honda with a splash. Highlight was just before the finish when Kimala 2 gave Honda a Carpentier somersault splash. Other than that, not much of a match. 1 star. 2. Kawada and Kikuchi beat Kobashi and Masao Inoue in 2023 when Kikuchi pinned Inoue with a tombstone piledriver. Not a bad match, but a disappointment considering the caliber in the ring. 2 stars. Puerto Rico. El Nene captured the WWC Universal title from Carlos Colon on February 15 in Caguas. Colon has his foot over the ropes at the time of the pin, but heel manager Rico Suave, Julio Estrada, knocked the foot off the rope before the ref saw it. On the same show, the Chiqui Star and Invader No. 1 forming their tag team for the first time wound up against Huracan Castillo and Jim Steele, subbing for Abdullah the Butcher, who no-showed once again, and doing a double countout. Doug Masters has returned. Butcher was supposed to be in over the past weekend doing that same tag match and Colon vs. Nene for the Universal Belt as the headline match. A newcomer named Chuck Singer is in doing a prelim program against WWC lightweight champ Pablo Marquez. Have no idea who he is, but given the name similarity, maybe it's the disappeared former All Japan wrestler Richard Slinger. EMLL Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr., under the management of the original Dr. Wagner, captured the CMLL tag team titles in the tournament, which ended on February 28 at Arena Mexico before an estimated 10,000 fans, beating Dos Caras and Ultimo Dragon in the finals. King and Wagner had earlier beaten Negro Casas and Black Magic, while Caras and Dragon had beaten the Headhunters. The plan right now is for Antonio Inoki to promote a World Wrestling Peace Festival on June 15 at Arena Mexico. The working idea is to promote 9 singles matches, mainly with Japanese junior heavyweights facing Mexicans. The Japanese are expected to be Inoki Satoru Sayama, who was a legend in Mexican rings in the late 70s, Jushin Liger, Great Sasuke, Shinjiro Otani, Koji Kanemoto, Kendo Kai-Shin, Tokumitsu Ishizawa of New Japan, El Samurai and Taka Michinoku. There is some talk of matching Sayama with Solar, to reprise their late 70s feud, and with matching Inoki with Dory Funk. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Mr. Niebla were both suspended for 1 week for no showing a February 23 card at Pista Arena Revolucion in Mexico City. On February 25 at Arena Coliseo they held an 8-man elimination match, which is an EMLL tradition every few months to load up on the workers and do a lengthy 7-fall match. Teams were Casas and Dragon and Caras and Mascara Magica, who ended up being the final winner, beating Emilio Charles Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and Rey Bucanero and Felino. Black Warrior is staying with this promotion, at least for now. Promo Azteca. The original Mascara Sagrada won the IWC heavyweight title, the old Ron Scholar promotion, from Mascara Año 2000 on February 16 in Cancun. Now we have a weird situation where Mascara Sagrada from this promotion holds one of its world heavyweight titles, while in AAA an entirely different Mascara Sagrada holds its Mexican national heavyweight title. This group's major show of the week was February 28 at a small gym in Mexico City where they began tournaments to establish the new Aztecas Championships. They had an 8-man tournament for the middleweight title, which ended up with Pantera del Ring going to the finals. The other semifinal ended up as a double countout with Black Dragon vs. Angel Azteca, so those two are scheduled for a rematch on March 7 in Toluca, with the winner facing Pantera for the title later that night. The others guy in the tourney were Super Colo, Psicosis, Tiburon, Ultimo Guerrero, Ultimo Rebelde, and there was heat over Colo and Psicosis not making it to the finals since they were the biggest stars in there. Next Tijuana looks to be March 21, but doesn't look to be a major show at this point. Kevin Nash, Scott Hall and Six turned down the date, saying they'd be interested in coming in at some point to work on top against the Azteca guys, but wanted to spend Easter with their families. AAA. The February 21 King of Rings show in Madero drew approximately 9,000 fans, which is the biggest AAA crowd of the year. Diesel and Razor Ramon and Jake Roberts missed the show due to a legit problem as the airport in Madero was fogged in, so the main event never took place. The rest of the show was built around 4 corners elimination matches similar to the Final 4 match at the last WWF pay-per-view, except that eliminations were by pinfalls or DQs and not over the top rope. The first 4 matches ended up being won by babyfaces Latin Lover, Heavy Metal, Hector Garza, and Octagon, so it was an all-face Final 4 won by Latin when he pinned Garza, after Garza missed the corkscrew in the ring. They drew a nearly full house on February 28 at Juan de la Barrera Gym in Mexico City on February 28 with a main event of Pero Aguayo and Kinect and Cibernetico over Ramon and Diesel and Pierre Roth Jr. The foreigners came out in Get this original idea, MWO t-shirts as part of a new group called the Mexican World Order, which is basically the ultimate heat with Ramon and Diesel doing a gimmick where they are pretending to be Mexicans. Match hasn't aired on TV yet, but from the description, it sounded horrible. First fall saw Connect make Ramon submit, and then Cibernetico was supposed to power slam Diesel, but he couldn't get him up. In the second fall, Cibernetico was busted open and taken to the locker room, making it 3-on-2. The Rudos continued the attack until Garza, Metal, Latin and Cibernetico ran out, causing the Rudos to run away for a triple count-out finish. Razor and Diesel will be back this weekend doing shows on March 7th in Tijuana, March 8th in Chihuahua, and a major show on March 9th in Juarez. Latin and Garza and Octagon beat Pentagon, yet another new one, who may be Angel Mortal, and Fuerza Guerrera and Abismo Negro via DQ when Pentagon fouled Octagon. Blue Demon Jr.'s heel turn may be over already as he teamed with La Parca Jr. against Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Pantera. In the third fall, Heavy Metal ran in and gave Demon Jr. a lecture about being a heel, and Demon teased to the fans he couldn't make up his mind which way to go, and finally, with the fans cheering him, he turned back face. All Japan. The first Budokan Hall show of the year on March 1st was reported as a real hot show, and we're told it drew a legitimate sellout of 16,300. As mentioned before, All Japan announces the sellout every time since it has a streak dating back many years of Budokan and Korakuen sellouts, but in reality the streak was broken and most of the recent Budokans were not truly sellouts but near sellouts, which was attributed to the idea of an All Japan main event featuring an outsider and former UWFI wrestler Yoshihiro Takayama. Takayama and Gary Albright teamed up to challenge the group's double tag team champs, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao, in the semifinal to the Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Steve Williams match. Considering that Takayama is hardly a big name on his own, that says something about the interest All Japan fans have in seeing their top stars face outsiders. The tag title match had the most heat on the card, particularly when Kawada faced off with Takayama, and ended with Kawada using the stretch plum for a submission on Takayama in 14-12. Third from the top saw Kentaro Shiga and Jun Akiyama beat Kenta Kobashi and Yoshinobu Kanemaru in 1706 when Shiga pinned Kanemura with an Enzuigiri off the middle ropes. Next tour is the annual Champion Carnival Tour from March 22nd to April 19th with the finals at Budokan Hall. It'll be a 13-man round-robin tournament with Misawa, Tao, who pinned Williams in the finals last year, Akiyama, Tamon Honda, Kawada, Kobashi, Takao Amori, Jun Izumida, Williams, Johnny Ace, Giant Kimala 2, Albright and Stan Hansen. So each wrestler will have 12 singles matches and get 2 points for a win, 1 for a draw. The top 2-point getters meet in the finals on April 19th. It's traditionally the second most important tour of the year, but it's nothing new on the lineups with the same basic crew as on every tour, so it's somewhat lackluster going in from a booking standpoint. It probably will produce some match of the year candidates. The major tournament match lineups are March 22nd at Korakuen Hall, Misawa vs. Albright, Tao vs. Ace, Kobashi vs. Amori and Kawada vs. Honda. March 23rd Korakuen Hall, Kawada vs. Hansen, Misawa vs. Amori, Williams vs. 2, Akiyama vs. Izumida. March 24th in Chiba, Misawa vs. Akiyama. March 25th in Saku, Kobashi vs. Albright. March 26th in Fukui, Tao vs. Williams. March 28th in Nagaoka, Misawa vs. Kobashi, Hansen vs. Williams. March 29th in Nagariyama, Tao vs. Akiyama. March 30th in Nagoya, Misawa vs. Kawada, Kobashi vs. Akiyama, Tao vs. Albright, Hansen vs. Ace. March 31st in Takaoka, Kawada vs. Ace. April 2nd in Osaka, Misawa vs. Williams, Kawada vs. Albright, Akiyama vs. Hansen. April 4th in Kumamoto, Kobashi vs. Ace, Akiyama vs. Albright. April 5th in Okayama, Tao vs. Kobashi, Williams vs. Albright. April 6th in Himeji, Kawada vs. Williams, Akiyama vs. Ace. April 7th in Totori, Misawa vs. Tao, Hansen vs. Albright. April 10th in Shizuoka, Kobashi vs. Hansen, Kawada vs. Akiyama. April 12th at Korakuen Hall, Kawada vs. Kobashi, Williams vs. Ace. April 13th in Kanazawa, Misawa vs. Hansen. April 14th in Niigata, Kawada vs. Tao, Kobashi vs. Williams. April 15th in Koriyama, Akiyama vs. Williams, Tao vs. Hansen. And April 17th in Soka, Misawa vs. Ace. Also on the April 2nd show, Hayabusa from FMW will make a guest appearance. Baba announced it in a press conference, but didn't announce who he would face, and in the announcement said that no All Japan wrestlers would be appearing on FMW shows, but that it was possible that other FMW wrestlers would appear on All Japan shows. Baba, Mitsuharu Misawa, Kena Kobashi and Masao Inoue are going to Taiwan, where their television show is incredibly popular. The story is that Baba and company are going to scout Taiwanese athletes and bring one or two back to Japan to train into pro wrestling and become local heroes in a few years when All Japan starts running shows in China. Apparently there is a guy who is 6 and 9 that they are looking at. February 23rd television show did a 3.2 rating. New Japan. New Japan still hasn't decided on an opponent for Shinya Hashimoto on the April 12th show. The only name even hinted about is Naoya Ogawa, the 3-time world judo champion who is expected to officially sign his New Japan contract later this week and was scheduled to debut underneath at the Dome show. Ogawa is currently in Los Angeles training under Satoru Sayama and Antonio Inoki to learn pro wrestling. Word we got at press time is that Ogawa's issuing the challenge to Hashimoto would appear in the newspapers in Japan on March 5th. In a move totally unrelated to pro wrestling, but related to a story in last week's issue, the Rupert Murdoch organization on March 3rd divested itself of all interest in TV Asahi, which is the major shareholder in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Murdoch sold its financial interests in TV Asahi, one of the major networks in Japan, to concentrate its Japanese business on what many expect to be the future of Japanese mass communication satellite television dishes. So whatever political problems it would create for a Turner Group trying to buy into a company where Murdoch has key financial interest is no longer the case. Still, from all reports from Japan, there doesn't appear to be any significant interest in Japan from the major stockholders of New Japan to sell to Americans. Tickets for the May 3rd Osaka Dome debut went on sale on March 2nd with Hashimoto, Keiji Muto, and Osamu Nishimura there, and only 1,000 tickets were sold the first day. Traditionally for Tokyo Dome shows, first-day ticket sales are usually between 9,000 and 12,000, and for the main events fans are really excited for. There have been first days that have topped 30,000. Everyone figured going in that the Osaka Dome would be the hardest show of the year for New Japan because the fans there have always been fickle when it comes to pro wrestling. February 15th TV show did a 4.0 rating. Other Japan notes. Atsushi Onita held a press conference on March 3rd to announce he would be wrestling on the March 14th FMW show in Sapporo in an 8-man Tornado Street Fight death match teaming with Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda against the Gladiator and Hiskatsu Oya and the Headhunters in the main event. Pancrase announced its March 22nd show in Nagoya as Masakatsu Funaki vs. Paul Lesenby in a non-title match, Yoshiki Takahashi vs. Semischult, Asami Shibuya vs. Boss Ruten, Yuki Kondo vs. Takaku Fuku, Rishi Yanagisawa vs. Keiichiro Yamamiya, Kyuma Kunyoku vs. Hagar Chen and Satoshi Hasegawa vs. Takafumi Ito. Chip Minton, the bobsled racer who has done some wrestling for USWA, like 2 weeks, and has been working in the power plant in Georgia and done some WCW jobber work, got a lot of pub this past week in Japan. Minton was on the U.S. bobsled racing team in the 1997 World Championships with the finals held on February 26 in Nagano, Japan. The U.S. team took the silver medal in the competition behind Switzerland. Since pro wrestling is a huge deal in Japan, the idea that a pro wrestler, however insignificant his name may be in the U.S., did well in a major sporting event in Japan was huge news, and this should enable him to work in Japan as a wrestler. Minton was a member of the 1994 U.S. Olympic team in Lillehammer, Norway, finishing 14th, and is expected to be part of the U.S. team in 1998 for the Games in Nagano, Japan. Takashi Ishikawa's new promotion called Ishikawa Ika, which means translated basically the Ishikawa family, debuted on March 2nd at Korakuen Hall before about 1,500 fans. The group was largely built around Ishikawa's wrestlers and guys from the IWA promotion. The big angle at the show was after the card was over, Shinya Kojika, president of Big Japan Pro Wrestling, attacked Ishikawa in the bathroom to set up this promotion and Big Japan feuding. Big Japan is building to an April 1st show at Korakuen Hall with a 4 corners match which will have tag teams from Heisei Ishigun, Ishikawa Ika, Big Japan and an outside team of Tarzan Goto and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga. All Japan Women were down to just an estimated 1,300 fans for its March 2nd Korakuen Hall date. They are doing a women's interpromotional feud in the JD promotion. On the March 2nd main event in Kawasaki, Lioness Asuka teamed with a masked woman known as Ryuna to beat Bison Kimura and Yuki Lee. Asuka was seconded by both Shark Tsuchiya of FMW and Eagle Sawai of LPW who both interfered. In addition, JD wrestler Bloody Phoenix joined Asuka's group and is simply now wrestling as the Bloody. They did an angle at the end of the year with Asuka punching the head of the company, but she's still around because she's got their World Heavyweight title. The story now is Asuka will be in JD through April 20th, or if she loses the title as Bison Kimura will be challenging her. Kimura is expected to announce her retirement from pro wrestling very shortly. Hiro Miyagi of JWP retires on March 9th. USWA. The major show of the week was March 2nd in Memphis, but we don't have results at press time, with Brian Christopher versus Elijah in the main event, and a coward waves the flag match with Tony Williams in Christopher's corner and Brackus, Ahim Albrecht, in Elijah's corner. Brackus debuted on television this week, joining other WWF trainees like the Truth Commission as working underneath here. Brackus was described as wrestling just like every green bodybuilder type that this business was filled with during the mid-80s. They introduced a new announcer who they just called Stacy, as something of a knockoff of Sunny. Stacy is actually Jerry Lawler's longtime girlfriend and is young enough to be his daughter. Lawler spanking Queen Nikki was the highlight of last week's Memphis show. The guy wrestling here as Super Hysteria is local wrestler Jason Meyer, who often does TV jobs as Tony Myers. ECW house shows this past week were February 28th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, drawing 400 fans, and March 1st in Scranton, Pennsylvania, drawing 1,590 paid, which is one of the 3 or 4 biggest paid crowds in company history. In Jim Thorpe, they did a series of angles with the Dudleys, who are getting a mega push to be the Eliminator's major foes, including on the pay-per-view show. First, Tommy Dreamer beat Devon, but Bubba Ray ran in and Sandman made the save. Sandman beat Bubba, but Devon ran in and the Gangstas made the save. However, Axel Rotten then ran in and the 3 left the Gangstas laying. Raven beat Louis Piccoli to keep the ECW title, and Sabu pinned Chris Candido in a very good match in the headliners. Scranton, which was taped for TV, was said to be a good show because the crowd heat was some of the best the company has ever gotten as they reacted big to everything, both big and little. Stevie Richards did an interview challenging Raven. Raven came out and DDT'd both Blue Meanie and Supernova and challenged Richards to kick him. As Richards set up, Raven walked out. Tommy Rich worked the show as a heel and apparently will form a tag team with Little Guido as the new FBI, full-blooded Italians. Candido beat Spicoli. After the match, the triple threat beat up Spicoli until the Pit Bulls came out. Pitbull number 1 put the full Nelson on Shane Douglas to a huge pop, and it took everyone to pull him off. Sandman and Dreamer beat Dudleys. Afterwards, Gangstas ran in to save them from the post-match, but Axel Rotten came out again, and once again the Gangstas were left laying. Later in the show, there was yet another brawl with Axel and Dudleys laying out Gangstas, whereupon Dudleys called themselves the greatest tag team in the world, which is the Eliminator's gimmick. Eliminators ran out for the save and gave Sign Guy total elimination. Raven beat Pitbull number 2 in a match filled with one run-in after another when Richards tried to kick Raven, but he ducked and kicked Pitbull, who was DDT'd and pinned. Eliminators beat Sabu and Van Dam in their typical ladders and tables match. At one point the ladder broke due to having too much weight on it, but they'd already done most of their ladder spots by that point. The fans gave them a standing O after the match. Pay-per-view tickets were to go on sale on March 3rd, with ringside at $100 and GA at $40. Ringside tickets also entitles the purchaser to a free t-shirt, a free program, and a half-price ticket to the Terry Funk banquet the night before. They aired just about the complete Sabu and Van Dam vs. Eliminators match from the February 21st arena show on television this past week. I thought it was on par or slightly below their November match. I guess it's an acquired taste to watch wrestling on the stuntman level and ignore the rest of the picture. The high spots are out of this world when they hit, but they miss a lot, and the transitions and psychology aren't there. If you're into wrestling for high spots alone or for stuntman work, this is as good a feud as it gets. But it's no better or no worse than a mid-card Mexican match with a bunch of flyers without years of experience who still miss a lot of their spots, except these matches had table and ladder spots thrown in, and they are bigger men, particularly John Cronus, doing the spots than the Mexican lightweights. Eliminators are the best high spot tag team in the US and do better teamwork spots than any of the Mexicans. The other TV match with Taz and Tracy Smothers was a good match. During the commentary they pushed Eliminators, calling them the best tag team in the world at least a half dozen times. Rick Rude hasn't been around because he's on a family vacation in Europe. Douglas will return on March 15th, but likely take a few weeks off after that match to rest his knee for the pay-per-view. His knee is said to be recovering really well. Upcoming lineups: March 8th in Trenton, New Jersey has Sabu vs. Candido, Sandman vs. Bubba, Dreamer vs. Devon. March 14th in Downingtown, Pennsylvania has Dreamer and Sandman vs. Dudleys, Sabu vs. Candido, Van Dam vs. Pitbull number 2, and Eliminators defending against Raven and Lee. March 21st in Waltham, Massachusetts has Dreamer and Sandman vs. Dudleys, Sabu and Van Dam versus Eliminators in a tables and ladders match, Douglas versus Pitbull number 2, possibly, and Terry Funk, March 22nd in Revere, Massachusetts has Eliminators versus Dudleys for the title. Raven and Douglas versus Pitbull number 2 and Mystery Partner, Funk. Sabu versus Condito and Taz versus Van Dam. March 29th in New Kensington, Pennsylvania at Valley High School has Dreamer and Beulah versus Douglas and Francine. Sabu and Van Dam versus Eliminators in tables and ladders match, Raven versus Sandman, Gangstas versus Dudleys, and Funk versus Lee. March 30th in Monaca, Pennsylvania at the Golden Dome has Dreamer and Funk versus Raven and Douglas, So versus Condito, three-way dance for tag titles with Eliminators, Dudleys, and Gangstas, Taz versus Van Dam and Pitbull number 2 versus Lee. Here and there. A rematch between Dan Severn and Dory Funk for the NWA title will headline the Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl on April 12th in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Former Las Vegas promoter T.C. Martin has resurfaces and has a show on March 28th in Sacramento, California with Sabu defending the NWC title against Severn. Talk about a total clash in styles. Plus Bam Bam Bigelow versus Jim Neidhart and Honky Tonk Man versus Junkyard Dog. The latest escapades of Billy Jack Haynes and his Shoot Radio feud with Matt Osborne. Matt Bourne ended over the past few weeks. Haynes basically disappeared, leaving his radio show behind. When Bourne was asked about Haynes' disappearance, he gave a diplomatic answer saying that he knows Haynes is around town but is not showing his face, and understandably so, and said he's looking over his shoulder quite a bit. It now appears that Haynes' challenge of Bourne to put up $10,000 for a legitimate fight between the two and is publicly exposing the business and talking about doing a tell-all book on pro wrestling were his way of trying to raise some badly needed cash. Anyway, the whole Haynes-Bourne deal was not a pro wrestling angle per se in the traditional sense, in that Haynes was trying to build up a match that would be a shoot so he could win quick cash. And speaking of strange, over this past weekend, Kirk White, a local sports merchandise store owner and sports star autograph session promoter, along with Alexis Smirnoff, Cecil Dubois, who was a major wrestling star in the area during the 70s, ran a pair of weekend shows in Fremont, which drew a healthy crowd of 600. And Stockton, California on February 28th and March 1st that were to be headlined by Conan vs. Black Warrior, the EMLL wrestler, as opposed to taking a local jobber and putting a hood on him. With Conan getting in a fairly serious auto accident on February 27th coming home from a show in Mexico City, he received a concussion but was actually back in the ring a few days later on Nitro. He wasn't able to appear, and he sent Rey Mysterio Jr. and Damien up from San Diego to take his place. The problem was that at match time, it was pretty much a definite Damien was coming, and it was considered likely that Mysterio Jr. was coming as well. Smirnoff then booked 4 local area wrestlers as replacements instead. Then Mysterio Jr. and Damien arrived at about 10:20 p.m. with 2 matches left in the show, and there was a huge fuss backstage since the promoters didn't want to use them. There were quite a few people and several wrestlers backstage who ranged from curious to furious about having probably the most spectacular performer in the world ready to work an indie show and the promoters not wanting to put him on the show. It appeared from here to be a strictly financial decision, and that if they worked, they'd have to be paid main event money, and almost none of the fans there knew they were in the building, and the show was almost over by that point. The Mexican performers also claimed a third party involved with the show told them to pack their bags and go back to Mexico when they arrived backstage, which they took as something of a racial jab and a total lack of respect for their standings as wrestlers who work all over the world regularly. It wound up with Barbara Blaze and Victoria Moreno, who worked Tijuana shows for Promo Azteca, walking out as well over the treatment of Mysterio Jr. and Damien, since they were involved in making calls to bring the two sides together. Actually, it was even weirder than it sounds with all the personalities involved, because it was the ultimate old school versus new school clash in regard to what level of star people are in this business today. This was supposed to be a starting point for White, who wanted to eventually run Promo Azteca shows in Northern California, but Conan then said he and his crew of wrestlers wouldn't work any shows where Smirnoff, who was the one who made the call about not using Mysterio Jr. and Damien, was involved. By the way, without Conan vs. Warrior, the main event on that show was Greg Valentine vs. Buddy Rose. I haven't seen Rose, now 47, wrestle in years, and he really looked bad. He looked about 340, which is way down from his heaviest, but he's still terribly out of shape and couldn't do much but comedy, which he was still good at. They announced a May 3rd date in Fremont, California as a Ray Stevens memorial show, and said that appearing at the show would be Pat Patterson, Ian Ho, Pepper Gomez, Kenji Shibuya, and Mitsu Arakawa, who were all area stars in the Ray Stevens era. Former Olympic fencer Jeff Bookantz ran a fundraiser at Livingston, New Jersey High School for the U.S. fencing team to send the team to the Maccabiah Games in Israel over the summer, and raised more than $21,000. Among those working the show included Fred Blassie, Ken Patera, Nikolai Volkov, Iron Sheik, Doink the Kalla, Bam Bam Bigelow, Ace Darling, Devon Storm, Mike Sharp, King Kong Bundy, and Jimmy Snuka. UCW A Secret Cove restaurant in Alexandria, Virginia has Barbarian vs. Tracy Smothers as the main event. Hideo Nomo, a Japanese baseball legend of the Los Angeles Dodgers, grew up as a wrestling fan in Japan. His favorite American wrestlers, which should come as no surprise, are the Funks, Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, and Dusty Rhodes. Former TBS superstars of a generation ago, Tommy Rich vs. Masked Superstar, Bill Eadie, headlined for the Samoan on a show on February 28 in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. The flyer for the show had a WWF logo on it, although IFA called his promotion the World Wrestling Empire. Tully Blanchard, 43, worked in Mew's show in Baltimore on March 2, beating Jason Knight. It's probably the first stuff Blanchard has done since his brief ECW stint about 1 year ago. Unified Championship Wrestling on April 5 in Mobile, Alabama with Bob and Scott Armstrong and Bunkhouse Buck. If you mention the Observer at the door, you can get $1 off any ticket. Ultimate Championship Wrestling on March 22 in Deer Park, New York has Falcon Kopiris and Marty Jannetty and Tommy Cairo vs. Bruce Hart and Jim Neidhart and Tatanka as the main event. Tony Rumble's Century Wrestling Alliance is no longer working with Faro Entertainment. CWA on March 14 in Chelsea, Massachusetts has Rumble vs. Tony Atlas on top. NHB. Governor George Pataki officially signed the bill banning NHB into law on February 25. Although the law as it is written would allow the state to ban UFC on pay-per-view and in video stores, Pataki said that wouldn't occur. To attempt that kind of a ban would raise constitutional issues that could throw the entire law out, although with the wording of the law not being changed, it doesn't rule out enforcing the law more broadly for some time in the future. When signing the bill, Pataki said, "To have someone who wins by using chokeholds and kicking people while they are down is not someone our children should be looking to emulate. Lucky for us, our children have people like Mike Tyson to emulate instead of the horrible threat they may be exposed to someone like Dan Severn." Alabama should be debating legislation to ban NHB sometime this month. There was an IFC show on February 28 in Akwesasne, New York, a Mohawk Indian border nation about 5 miles south of Cornwall, ONT, before a sellout 2,200 fans. Wesley Gassaway, a Pancrase prelim match pro wrestler, won the tournament, beating Robert Lalonde in the finals in 4:26. The show received tons of media attention in the area and even in the New York City media. The show also featured the first women's NHB match ever in the U.S., as Becky Levy, 2-0 with Severn in her corner, beat 38-year-old Betty Fagan, a 238-pounder managed by Phyllis Lee, in 1:44. Fagan bled fairly heavily. The show was taped for television in Brazil, Russia and Japan, Samurai TV. IFC's next show is planned for an Indian reservation in Jackson, California, somewhere not far from Stockton, in May. The New York City media played it up as if it was the first NHB show ever in the state of New York, even though UFC ran a show in 1995 in Buffalo, New York. A major Iron Fighter tournament was held March 3 in Sao Paulo, Brazil by the Universal Vale Tudo Federation. The show was said to have been one of the best NHB shows ever when it came to quality of the matches, although it was said to be disorganized as a show. Basically, everyone paid the price. Carlos Barreto beat Kevin Randleman in the finals in 22:30 with a triangle choke in a very controversial finish. Randleman never tapped out, but the ref stopped the match feeling he was about to be put out. Mark Coleman, Randleman's second, went nuts claiming Randleman was just about to escape when the ref stopped the match. Both went in after taking a beating underneath. Randleman won a 20 minutes decision over Brazilian Ebenezer Fontes, but had his eyes shut in the process and still came out for a tiring second fight where it took him 12 minutes to beat Mario Neto. He went in with more damage than Barreto, who used a front guillotine to beat Geza Coleman Jr. in 2:57 in the first round and followed it up with an 8 minutes triangle choke tap-out victory over Daniel Babish. Babish nearly knocked Barreto out in the first minute of the fight, but Barreto came back to win, but suffered a lot of damage in the process. Randleman won a similar tournament in November in Brazil, and was an NCAA champion wrestler at Ohio State University. UFC vet Gary Goodridge tapped out in 10 minutes against Neto in the first round. Mark Kerr, who looked very impressive in winning a recent tournament in Brazil, is not going to be on the March 28 EFC show. UFC is attempting to sign Kerr for its July pay-per-view. EFC tickets go on sale on March 7 at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium in Des Moines, Iowa for the March 28 pay-per-view show. The lineup as it stands right now is Maurice Smith vs. Murakami Kazunari for the EFC heavyweight title, John LeBay vs. Kevin Jackson, Paul Jones vs. Eric Paulson, Alan Goes vs. Todd Bjornathan, John Lewis vs. Kenny Monday for the newly created welterweight title, Matt Hume vs. Pat Militic and Ralph Gracie vs. Eugenio Tato for the lightweight title. The plan is for every match except Jones-Paulson to air live on pay-per-view. Jones-Paulson will be taped ahead of time and inserted into the show if needed, as the belief is that a lot of the matches will go the time limit. Problem with that is that with no judges' decisions, time limit matches are usually unsatisfying even if they are generally more competitive than quickie massacres. Hardcore NHB fans are talking about this as one of the best lineups ever in the US because on paper, there isn't a fighter involved that isn't either experienced at NHB or a top-level ground fighter, and most of the matches appear competitive on paper. Reports we've heard is that the February 15th WIF show pay-per-view taping in Birmingham only sold something like 20 tickets. As best we know, they are still planning on running a second show on April 11th, but the idea that they are building to a tournament with $250,000 in prize money sounds either far-fetched or they are building to an economic disaster of extreme proportions. There is still almost nothing definite regarding UFC's next May 30th pay-per-view show. Most of the talk involves any combination of two of these three fighters, Mark Coleman, Marco Ruiz, and Don Frye, in the main event. Frye has at this point balked as doing the title match with Coleman because he was initially offered a $25,000 guarantee and $40,000 if he were to win, which is a major purse cutback, as the belief is that in the Severn-Coleman title match, that it was a $50,000 guarantee for the fight and $100,000 for the winner. If the purses are being cut back, based on the financial situation with the last show, you can figure out why. The talk now seems to be in the direction of doing a heavyweight and an under 200 tournament and one singles main event rather than the original plan of an under 200 tournament and 4 singles main events. UFCF on April 5th in Honolulu has Kimo vs. Brian Johnston as the main event. WCW. Nitro notes besides those already mentioned. Show opened with Conan and Hugh Morris over Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael when Public Enemy came out and tried to steal the briefcase from Deborah. Jarrett jumped out of the ring to save her and got the briefcase, but in the backswing pulling it away, clocked McMichael hard in the head, busting him open hard way, and Conan pinned him in 3:13. McMichael can take a shot. After the bout, Ric Flair and Arnold Anderson yelled at Jarrett for screwing up, but Deborah said it was an accident. Diamond Dallas Page pinned Rick Fuller. Juventud Guerrera beat Ray Mendoza Jr. Villano 4 in 5:06 with a Scorpio Splash in the best match of the show. Guerrera did one great move after another, including a tope from the apron through 2 sets of ropes. Dean Malenko pinned Mike Enos with an inside cradle in 4:27. They did the Bischoff-Schiller angle. Eddie Guerrero kept the U.S. title, pinning Ultimo Dragon in 2:48. What they did was good, but it was way too short and the finish blew. Guerrero and Malenko argued after the match. Scotty Riggs beat Mr. Wall Street via DQ and Buff Bagwell interfered. Then came the Piper segment. Rey Mysterio Jr. pinned JL with a springboard Hurricane Rana in 4:07. Not as good as most Mysterio matches. Medusa did an interview complaining about Bischoff leaving the women dormant and was attacked by Luna Vachon. So now they're back to repeating WWF angles that went nowhere. At least it gives them both something to do. The NWO did an interview. Sting came out with them but stood apart from them and never showed emotion. TV main was Luger and Giant vs. Steiners, and it wound up with NWO coming out and Steiners joined up with Luger and Giant. Sting came out with his bat, but before anything could happen involving him, Piper and his band of merry men came out and the show went off the air. During the show, Jacqueline challenged any male wrestler. Best bet is Disco Inferno, who is about the only guy who can get away with it. After this is written, but before any of you read this, it's expected that some sort of an angle with Dennis Rodman will be shot to get him involved in the uncensored pay-per-view. Tentative plan is for Akira Hokuto to return for Spring Stampede on April 6th and defend against Medusa. Six vs. Ultimo Dragon appears to have been dropped from uncensored because of Six's shoulder separation. Add Glacier vs. Mortis, Chris Cluseritis aka Chris Canyon, to the pay-per-view. Mortis, doing an even Glacier gimmick, will be managed by former SMW manager Daryl Van Horn. The two were set to debut on March 4th in Rome, Georgia. Cyclope, who also blew out his shoulder at Super Brawl, was already back in action this past weekend in Mexico. Does anyone know or understand what the rules are for the main event and uncensored? It's a cage match, with no ref and no DQ. I guess the singles and tag belts are at stake, although I don't exactly know what determines what. Like if Piper's team wins, does that leprechaun guy get the world title, or does he and the kickboxer guy become tag champs? Or does Tena become world champ? Bruno Sammartino won't be doing the Ilio Di Paolo Memorial Show this year in Buffalo, New York, as reported here many weeks back. Sammartino was asked to do the show again, but turned them down. Yuji Nagata finally debuted on March 3rd at the Omni in a match before the show went on the air. Naturally, he did a job for Ernest Miller, a power plant guy with all of about 3 pro matches. WCW has made a talent trading agreement with EMLL as reported here last week. This was not without some trepidation from the Promo Azteca contingent. Apparently both EMLL and Azteca considered they were being slapped in the face over last weekend because of the other being around. The Azteca guys were mad because Bischoff was only negotiating with their rival promoter in Mexico, Paco Alonso, right in front of everyone, similar to if when Bischoff went to New Japan next month if New Japan also invited and signed a deal at the same time with Vince McMahon. Alonso felt he was being slapped in the face because Kevin Nash and Scott Hall wore Azteca t-shirts on the pay-per-view, as if they were rubbing the rival company in his face. Bischoff assured the Azteca wrestlers that none of them would lose their jobs if a deal was made with EMLL. Alonso then went home from San Francisco and immediately went to the press talking about signing the talent exchange deal with WCW, which Azteca was again mad because it made them come off as second-rate, as if they had somehow screwed up their deal. No word on who from EMLL or when this deal will get off the ground. The taped match with Chris Benoit, where his ribs were taped, that was to air this past Saturday, was pulled from the Saturday night show because they wanted to sell his injury for several more weeks. However, Benoit that same night worked the house show in Columbia, South Carolina in the main event, teaming with Jarrett to beat Scott Norton, subbing for Kevin Nash and Scott Hall before a sellout $2,612 paid and $33,414, which was the only show of the week besides the Omni. The first Page vs. Savage match ended with Page winning by DQ when Norton and Hall interfered. Ric Flair won't be cleared to wrestle until May 6th, so he won't wrestle on the Jacques Rougeau show in Montreal on April 11th. That card is not doing well, with only 2,500 tickets sold several weeks after the big press conference in a 24,000-seat arena. Weekend numbers besides Nitro saw main event at 1.2, Saturday night at 2.4 and Pro at 1.5. The latest Playboy Celebrities magazine has several pages with both Kimberly and Diamond Dallas Page in various stages of nudity, no frontal, with a 100% worked storyline pushing their WCW angle. The idea is for the summer or fall to build to Page and Kimberly versus Savage and Liz, not in tag matches but with the women in the corners doing an angle with each other. Hogan has 2 more movies upcoming, one called Hardball, which is currently being filmed, and another called Ultimate Weapon, which will be filmed this summer in Montreal. Preliminary estimates on the buy rate for Super Brawl are 0.75, which would be about a $2.18 million company gross. Major events scheduled for May and June. Universal tapings will be May 1st to May 8th. Also Nitro's May 5th in Lakeland, Florida, May 12th in Baltimore, May 19th in either Atlanta or Asheville, North Carolina, and May 26th in Nashville. Saturday night TV tapings are May 13th in Salisbury, Maryland, and May 27th in Chattanooga. Pay-per-view that month is May 18th from Independence Arena in Chicago, featuring the return of Ric Flair, probably in a tag team with Kevin Green. In June, Nitros are June 2nd in Dayton, June 9th in Boston at the Fleet Center, June 16th in Chicago at United Center, June 23rd in Memphis, and June 30th in Las Vegas. Saturday tapings are June 10th in Lewiston, Maine, and June 24th in Jackson, Tennessee. There is a Germany tour June 8th to June 22nd. The Di Paolo show will be June 6th at the Marine Midland Arena in Buffalo, and the Great American Bash pay-per-view will be June 15th in Moline, Illinois, plus a major house show on June 28th at the Forum in Los Angeles. The Nitro on March 31st in Roanoke, Virginia saw 3,700 tickets sold the first day they were put on sale. WWF. Marc Mero had major reconstructive knee surgery on February 25th and will be out of action for 6 to 8 months. Mero was injured originally stomping on Goldust the second weekend of February but continued to work through the pay-per-view. Raw on March 3rd was taped February 26th in Berlin, Germany, before 6,373 paying $195,618. Only 5 matches aired. Hunter Hearst Helmsley beat Bret Hart by a DQ when Bret threw down the ref in 12:14. After the match, Joni Lee had a confrontation with Bret. Solid work but a terrible finish, 2 stars. Since Bret is leading to a submission match, shouldn't he have won using a submission building up to it? They went to interview Steve Austin, but all we heard is a toilet flushing. This stuff is so passé. Rocky Maivia beat Vader via DQ in an IC title match when Mankind interfered for no reason, hitting Maivia with the urn in 10-11, 2.5 stars. Vader did a very good job of carrying Maivia here to a good match with yet another lame finish. Sultan beat Flash Funk with the camel clutch in 4:03, 1 star. Sid pinned Mankind with a powerbomb in 13:19 to keep the WWF title in a match that was also pretty good due to Mankind's bumps. Sid broke the claw near the finish, 2.5 stars. Austin did a strong live studio interview. Main was the Owen Hart-Smith European title match. I guess this can be described as a show where the sum wasn't nearly as good as the parts. The March 16th Madison Square Garden card has Sid vs. Bret Hart in a cage match for the title, Undertaker vs. Vader in a casket match, Johnson vs. Savio Vega, Goldust vs. Farouk, Owen Hart and Smith vs. Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon, Maivia vs. Helmsley for the IC title, Godwins vs. Blackjacks, Bob Holly vs. Crush and Aldo Montoya and Bart Gunn vs. Headbangers. That card will air live on the MSG cable network. The show actually for the most part goes head-to-head with the uncensored pay-per-view show, but neither WWF or WCW are seeing it as competition since WWF is starting the show at 7:30 p.m. rather than moving it up to compete with the same starting time. Nor is WWF advertising on its own television shows that the card is on free cable, trying to protect the live gate. Only about 4,300 tickets had been sold for the show, which is way below normal for an MSG show. The belief is that they built up the Michael-Sid cage match for a blow-off at the Garden since the angle started there with Sid winning the title, but with Michaels out. Even though Hart has an issue, it's not registering at this point at the ticket window. MSG Cable used to broadcast the Garden House shows dating back from the mid-70s until the early 90s when the decision was made to drop it when live crowds were falling, and the WWF made the decision not to televise its arena shows on local cable. MSG Cable and WWF agreed for this as a one-time tryout deal. It's basically a given that Steve Austin will wrestle at Wrestlemania. The new working idea is that Joni Lee, the bodybuilder woman who will end up as the valet for Helmsley, will go by the stage name Chyna. That's the name she was working under in Europe this past week. Brian Pillman has been hitting the ropes and working out in the ring at Leigh Thatcher's gym in Cincinnati, Ohio, preparing for his return. It's the first time he's been in a wrestling ring in training for a comeback since his original Humvee wreck nearly 1 year ago. Miguel Perez has apparently signed a 3-year contract. Upcoming Raw plans are for live shows on March 10th, March 17th and March 24th in Worcester, Syracuse and Rockford respectively. The March 31st show will be a taped show from March 25th in Peoria, Illinois. The April 7th and April 14th shows will be taped in South Africa and Kuwait before back live on April 21st. Muscle Mag International ran a story on Brachus, Ahim Albrecht, and his switch from pro bodybuilding to pro wrestling. The gist of the story is that he was fed up with bodybuilding. At 34, he was unable to place high enough in contests to justify the huge costs of preparing for shows and talked about being fed up with the drug scene. He said he remarked to Ed Connors, who runs the Gold's Gym chain, that he'd like to do pro wrestling, and Connors called Shane McMahon and an interview was arranged and he had the job within a week. He said he signed a paper with Titan saying he wouldn't use any drugs and that he's been surprise tested on 3 occasions, including the night of his pro debut in November. German tour overall wasn't nearly the level of tours in the past. Figures were, February 20th in Aschaffenburg 1,473 fans and $51,228, February 21st in Chemnitz drew 2,800 paying $90,626, February 22nd in Dresden drew 2,330 and $73,152, February 23rd in Cologne drew 3,363 and $108,747, February 24th in Oberhausen drew 4,193 and $138,010, February 25th in Hamburg drew 3,480 and $118,363, February 27th in Halle drew 2,519 and $82,711, February 28th in Bayreuth drew 2,298 and $75,738. None of the German dates sold out, which has to be a first on a WWF tour. Weekend domestic shows were February 28th in New Orleans drawing 4,219 and $57,505, March 1st in Alexandria, Louisiana drew 2,390 and $27,006, and March 2nd in Tyler, Texas drew 2,834 and $33,063. Figures are still good considering all the big stars with the exception of Undertaker vs. Farouk were overseas. Weekend ratings besides Raw saw Blast Off at 0.7, Live Wire at 1.2 and Superstars at 1.4. WWF figures claim in 0.61 buy rate and $1.27 million gross for the Final Four pay-per-view. The readers' pages. UFC. I'm really seething over the BS the New York politicians pulled on UFC. The climate today is so riddled with reactionary politics that something has got to be done. I heard Governor Pataki on a talk show on WCBS say to a UFC fan that it's being banned because it sets a bad example for kids. This was his best argument. He said that sports figures are supposed to be our role models. Meanwhile, he pops in on Howard Stern's show to rub elbows for continued endorsements. Before the caller could at least defend UFC and react to Pataki's ridiculous argument, they went to another call. Gene Temesi. Piscataway, New Jersey. Funaki. I know some people question Masakatsu Funaki about being king of pancrase and why he doesn't go into the octagon. Please remember that Funaki has already created and trained 2 UFC stars, Ken Shamrock and Yoshiki Takahashi. The young lion who at one time lost his job with New Japan Pro Wrestling because he punched a taxi driver since the driver said pro wrestling was fake, 10 years later, is living proof that pro wrestling is not fake but a sports art form. The Funaki vs. Boss Rutan match that aired on pay-per-view was voted #1 match of 1996 in many reliable magazines and television shows in Japan. Riki Choshu's next target to destroy the shooting myth after UWFI will be pancrase. But I believe this time, Choshu will have a tough time since fans are more educated than before. Shamrock may have made the right decision to go back to traditional pro wrestling considering the political problems facing UFC, but I hope he doesn't forget where he came from or his WWF days may not be as bright as he thinks. To me, the February 24th Monday Night Raw was a historically significant television show. I congratulate Paul Heyman for pulling it off. It was a victory for insiders in that we can see Sandman drinking beer on television before 9:30 p.m. on a highly rated television show. Heyman gave me hope that the minority of smart fans can manipulate the casual audience for a better understanding and penetration of this sport. He transformed his own angle into reality and in his own way also proved that pro wrestling isn't fake. My hat's also off to Vince McMahon for showing us the depth of the wrestling universe featuring both ends of the spectrum represented by Shamrock and ECW. From real shooting to the ultimate fantasy working. Only the WWF, the true wrestling innovator, can book these two extremes on the same television show. Tadashi Tanaka. New York, New York. ECW. I doubt if Monday Night Raw will help sell many pay-per-view orders for ECW. They needed to air a better match like Sabu vs. Chris Candido and have Joey Styles doing the announcing to help their mediocre wrestlers get ECW over better. How about these potential future WWF matches? Bret Hart vs. Ken Shamrock. Road Warriors vs. Crawford and Furnace. Road Warriors vs. Eliminators. Hector Garza vs. Sabu. Steve Austin vs. Taz. Mankind vs. Raven. Shawn Michaels vs. Stevie Richards. Ed Branscombe. Savannah, Georgia. I attended both the February 15th ECW show in Revere and the February 16th CWA show in Chelsea, and the contrasting behavior at each show was most interesting. During the Michinoku Pro 6-man tag match at the ECW show, the fans did nothing but yell racial slurs at the wrestlers, stopping only to pop for spectacular flying moves. The ECW crowd didn't respect most of the other wrestlers on the card, including Sabu. The fans loudly expressed their homophobia throughout the show as well. The next day at the CWA show, I didn't hear one racist remark in the crowd. Unlike the morons at the ECW show, the ECW crowd obviously realized the Japanese wrestlers were working their asses off and appreciated them for it. The local ECW crowd is clearly not the hardcore wrestling fans ECW followers are supposed to be. Because of the audience behavior toward the wrestlers, the high ticket prices, and the disappointing overall work rate at the last 2 Revere shows, I don't plan on attending future ECW events. Joe Janey. East Boston, Massachusetts. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. March 10, 1997. This is the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed this program. Please like and subscribe. Comments help the algorithm. See you next.